All right, so you guys are in the right room. I think achieving hybrid cloud data agility with NSX. All right, so just a quick show of hands. I want to make sure who's in the audience. How many of you guys are cloud providers? All right, and then the rest by customers, right? Enterprise customers. All right, so this session caters into what solution faction our provider did and how they managed to achieve hybrid cloud security. So real quick before we get started, disclaimer, you guys probably have seen this in all of your sessions, so you can probably recite this better than I can. So I'll just give you 10 seconds to look into that and then we'll get started. All right, so let's jump into a couple of announcements. So for those that are providers in the room, the VMware vCloud Network has been rebranded, and now we are the VMware Cloud Provider Program. So I work with the VMware Cloud Provider Program, and essentially what they are is like Rackspace, CenturyLink, Faction. We have 4,500 partners, and they basically provide hosted private clouds, public clouds, and different cloud offerings to our customers. So from now on, the program is called VMware Cloud Provider Program. It's no longer known as vCloud Air Network. All right, so introductions. So obviously, I'm not any of these guys. So Nick O'Donovan is the systems engineer for Faction, and Brian Gallant is the cloud services architect at Faction. So Nick, unfortunately, was in a car accident this weekend and was not able to make it. And Brian, his wife went into early labor. So he wasn't also able to make it. So if they can't make it, who's this guy on stage and why is he talking to me? All right, so that's me. My name is Victor Sandoval. I am a senior cloud solutions architect and I work with the VMware Cloud Provider Program. My goal is to help cloud providers develop new solutions for our customers. My focus is on NSX. I've been doing NSX since the Nicero acquisition. I have about 10 years of experience and 6 of them working at VMware back when like Site Recovery Manager and P2Vs were cool. I'm a VCDX MV and I'm also an evangelist of the program. So if any of you guys want to go for your VCDX, please talk to me after the session. So again, I found out that I'm covering this session about 3 days ago. So please bear with me. I am familiar with this solution, but I might be missing some of the actual details. So real quick about Faction. So Faction again is one of our providers, and they focus on dedicated private clouds at scale. So what that means is that they have an offering where the customer has direct access to vCenter. It's co-managed by Faction and by the customer. They also manage networks. So they are able to give you dedicated private lines between multiple clouds and onto your on-premise data center. They also have a storage solution that is an NFS or SIPs, and they are able to provide this storage anywhere or on any operating system, whether if it's on-premise or on the cloud. So what they accomplished was with one of their customers. We changed the name of the customer. The customer didn't want to be part of this presentation, so we changed the name and we changed the name of the product. But essentially, Cake Entertainment is a gaming company. They focus on online gaming, and they launched a new game called Mortal Kombat. Obviously, the name was changed. There's no name called Mortal Kombat, so please don't Google it. You're not going to find anything. So Mortal Kombat is a game developed by Cake Entertainment, and they have originally it was hosted on their on-premise environment. They didn't predict the game to be so successful, and their system was taxed very heavily. So they have bursting issues whenever sometimes the users complain about not being able to get into the game because the system was so slow, and they also had a security breach. One of the web servers was compromised, and because one web server was compromised, eventually all the web servers were compromised as well because they were on the same layer 2 network. So let's look into how that environment looked like. Again, this is not my slide, so but it's pretty cool. A long time ago in data center far away. All right, so let's look into how that architecture look like. It's usually on-premise. This is your typical vSphere environment pre-NSX. So you have a management cluster where vCenter resides, vrobs, etc., all your management stack. And then you have your compute cluster where your workloads reside. And those of you familiar with vSphere networking, before NSX, we had a virtual distributed switch, and you have port groups where your virtual machines reside on. On top of the stack, you have your layer 3 devices, usually your router, and then on top of that, you have a physical firewall. So in this particular architecture, the only device that is actually secure is the firewall. If one VM gets compromised, since all the other web VMs are on the same network, potentially all virtual machines can be compromised. So what Cake Entertainment addressed this issue prior to NSX was with guest OS firewalls. So these were originally Linux VMs, and they had to find a way to automate policies on the guest OS level to every single virtual machine. Obviously, this is a headache when you had to scale with possibly dozens of virtual machines as the game grew in popularity. So what Cake Entertainment did was first provide professional services to their on-premise data center and re-architect it with NSX. They use NSX as a pivotal point for managing security on Cake's environment. So this is how the environment looked after that professional services and re-architecture. They basically deployed NSX. And we added another cluster, an edge cluster. Now, before I continue, how many of you are familiar with NSX? All right, so that's a good show of hands. So everybody knows what an edge cluster is. All right, so an edge cluster basically is just a set of ESX hosts where we use for our edges. And the reason why we have our edges separated from our compute cluster is for mainly two reasons. One, I don't have to trunk my out-of-bound VLANs all across my data center. I only had to put them in one particular section of my data center. So I don't have to extend that layer 2 network everywhere. The other one is CPU and memory contention. Again, since so some of the customers that Faction have go from 64 terabytes of memory all the way up to 64 petabytes of storage. So some of these customers are very, very large, and extending that VLAN across the data center is very difficult. So they decided to opt for an architecture that uses an edge cluster. They added distributed logical routers, and for those of you that are not familiar with NSX, what a distributed logical router does, it simplifies the routing. Instead of going over to the top of rack device to provide those layer 3 services, the routing is done locally at the host. And then, but the most important feature that Cake Entertainment was looking at was the security policies at the VM. So prior to NSX, again, the only real way to provide security was at the top, was at that physical firewall. Now with NSX, we can provide a firewall at every single one of the virtual machines, and we don't have to worry about finding a way to automate the guest OS policy anymore. Because with NSX, the way the Faction did, they build their rule sets with IP sets. So basically, they created an IP set table for all the web VMs, all the app VMs, all the database VMs, and whenever a new VM got deployed, they were automatically put into that IP set. Or they could also use other means other than IP sets. They were able to use tags, VM names, logical switch, membership, etc. So whenever a new VM gets deployed, the security policy automatically got installed. But that only takes care of one issue, right? The issue of security. As I mentioned before, the game became more and more popular, and Cake Entertainment Systems had problems bursting into the cloud. So Faction developed a solution called the Faction block. The Faction block essentially, bursting at the seams. So how do we solve the bursting problem? So this Faction block is a SDDC instance running on Faction, very similar to what Cake has on premise, with an edge cluster and a resource cluster. And again, this environment is co-managed between the customer and Faction. So Faction manages the hardware, and Cake Entertainment Systems manages the virtual machines and the NSX infrastructure on the Faction block. And again, it's the same approach, distributed logical routers, logical switches, and distributed firewall policies. But the benefits of having NSX on faction as well as on-premise is that whenever Kagan determines writes a security policy on their on-premise environment, they can extract those IP sets, those security policies, and export them over to factions data centers without having to re-architect every solution or republish the firewall policies continuously. Right, okay, so let's keep it interactive. If you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. Right? All right, so any questions on this so far?
Yeah, one.
Yeah.
How many VMs?
Yeah. Yeah, so I believe it was 4,000 VMs on premise, and they were not able to burst into that. I'm not sure how many VMs are currently on faction. That's a better question for the accounting, but unfortunately they were not able to make it. But from a scalability perspective, as you add more and more hosts into this faction block, you add more and more capacity to the distributed firewall. From an escalation perspective, it's very easy for a faction to add more hosts because they already have them sitting on their data center. They don't have to procure them. Okay?
Any third-party security service?
Sorry?
Any third-party firewall or just distributed firewall?
Yeah, so the question was any third parties or just a distributed firewall. As of right now, it's just a distributed firewall. They are looking into deep packet inspection. And for that, they were thinking about leveraging Palo Alto, but that's currently, as of this solution, that was not implemented. But yeah, it is possible to add Palo Alto, Rapid7, or some of our other ISVs that interact with NSX. Okay. So the game was very successful, and I think this session is going to be a little bit short. But the game was very successful, and Cake Entertainment decided to build yet another game. And in this case, they wanted the game to expand multiple platforms, not just focus on PC gaming alone, and have also a chat capability. So what they wanted to do was the chat capability. They wanted to use Amazon's AWS native services. So they built a Lambda function for that chat functionality, and they also wanted the game to focus for the Xbox console. And so the Xbox components were fronted on Azure. So now this is kind of now the solution gets a little bit more complex because I have two mega clouds, AWS, Azure. I have the faction data center with the faction block, and I have the customer's on-premise data center, Kex data center, and all of these are connected with factions internet network exchange. And essentially what that is private links that connects all of these networks, all of these clouds together. And what that basically gives us is amazing capability. I can migrate virtual machines between factions data center and my on-premise data center using Cross vCenter and NSX vMotion. And with right now, faction is focusing on Amazon's VMC. They were part of the Lighthouse program, which basically before VMC became GA or initial availability, they are working in a way to manage add-on services onto VMC. So in a few months from now, once that solution is capable, they're going to be able to push firewall policies, not only to the faction block or to the on-premise environment, but also over to AWS, VMC. All right. So with all these networks connected, our powers combined. All right. With all these networks connected, they also managed to do the cloud control volumes, which is essentially the storage solution that I mentioned earlier. They are able to put NFS and CIFS data stores on any VM, on any of these clouds, in a secure manner. Any questions? All right. So originally this was meant to be a whiteboarding session between two people. Obviously, it's just me. So That's why the presentation is so short. So I do apologize for that, but that is pretty much it. Unfortunately, again, my apologies. This was last minute. It was family emergencies, and I do apologize for that. So if you guys don't have any questions, I'm afraid that's it. Go ahead. Yeah, he's fine. Yeah, he got T-bone, but he's fine. Yeah, and I think the baby was born already, so that's good. All right. Any other questions? Well, maybe get an early lunch, but thank you guys. I appreciate it.